dropping shit at the pilot. Niggas be broken, be sobbing, but still talking shit like they violent. Niggas is broke.
Bill Russell, a 5-time MVP, 4-time rebounding champion, 11 All-NBA teams, and most notably an 11-time champion. One of the game's greatest legends, be easily the most disrespected legend out of them all. Yeah, sure, there are guys like Tim Duncan and Steph Curry that get discredited for being system players, but the disrespect to Bill Russell is just way out of line. It's too much, man. I've seen more people disregard Bill Russell's whole career simply for his era than any other player. And the arguments they use to me are just so idiotic and just shows their lack of knowledge about the greatness of Bill Russell. Let's first start off with the basic argument that he's overrated. First of all, you're already wrong right there, because I've never talked to a guy and said Bill Russell's the GOAT because of his 11 rings. Most of the time, he's really not in the top 5 of anyone's list. And that's because people know that accolades aren't everything. And you have to count everything into the discussion. And when you add everything up, guys like Magic, Kareem, and LeBron have had better careers and deserve a higher place than Bill Russell, and rightfully so. So with that being said, most people, just from everyday talk and just personal experience, put Bill Russell around the 7 through 9 mark. And according to this poll I asked on Twitter yesterday, nearly 60% of people believe he's around 8 through 10 or not even top 10 at all. And then let's ask ourselves what the definition of overrated is. And that is when people rate someone higher than what they actually are. And if a majority of people are rating him at 8 or lower, which is around the right range for Bill Russell, if not a little lower, by definition, he is already not overrated. And when we talk about the greatest players of all time, y'all do know greatness isn't all about the stats, right? Especially for the players of the 60s, and especially Bill Russell. But first, can we stop with this terrible idea that just because a player of today can dominate the 60s, that it means we should diminish what those players have done? Because first of all, if it wasn't for those guys, the modern NBA wouldn't even exist. And two, that is honestly one of the worst arguments I've ever heard. Jahlil Okafor, Rajon Rondo, and Dwight Howard. I'm pretty sure the common NBA fan wouldn't consider these guys stars right now, except for maybe Dwight Howard to a select few. But the point is, with today's faster pace, the fact that it goes up and down, and the fact that shooting is so emphasized, they've been basically left out. But I think it's a widely known idea that if Jahlil Okafor played in the 2000s, he'd be a perennial all-star and an extremely valuable asset, because the 2000s and the 90s were dominated by post players, and Jahlil Okafor and guys like Greg Monroe are post players. So are we calling the 2000s trash now too? Because Jahlil Okafor can dominate in it? It wasn't too long ago in 2010 through 2012 when Rondo was considered a top 5 point guard in the league. Are we calling that era trash now too? Dwight Howard was an MVP candidate and almost a top 5 player in the league in the mid to late 2000s. Are we calling that era overrated too? Do you see where I'm getting at here? So this whole notion that Bill Russell's overrated because any player in the league today could dominate the 60s is just completely illogical, because there are players today that would have dominated the game 5 years ago and did, but we don't ever say that. And speaking of that too, even if they did go back to the 60s, they would not dominate like Wilt and Bill Russell did. People act like Bill Russell was just this regular 6'10" center that just dominated a weak era, but that is far from the truth. If you've watched Bill Russell footage, you can see this man was going coast to coast with the ball, looking like a damn guard, similar to Kevin Durant going coast to coast today. I don't care what the era is, that is pretty impressive, man, especially if you look at the speed he was dribbling at, considering the fact that he's primarily a glass cleaner and a rim protector. It would be like watching DeAndre Jordan go coast to coast off the dribble. If you've watched Bill Russell footage, you would see that he clearly has the ability to blow by people off the triple threat, a skill that really no big has today except for these renaissance bigs like Cat and AD. His rebounding and shot blocking are out of this world, and please do not give me the excuse that he was blocking 5'6" white guys, because Bill Russell's leaping ability is world class, and I mean that literally. He was ranked 7th in the world in the high jump in 1956 and 3rd in the US. And from almost every account I've read online, Bill Russell was said to be just as good as a leaper as Wilt Chamberlain, if not better, and he has the highest vertical of all time in the NBA at 48 inches. And let's just lowball Bill Russell here and say he had a 44-inch vertical. That's the same vertical as LeBron James, higher than Dr. J, Vince Carter, Blake Griffin, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, Tracy McGrady, and Shawn Kemp, which are players who have basically made a career out of their explosiveness and dunking. And his rebounding ability in almost every single metric, if not every metric, is top 5 all time, with most people having him at 1 or 2 with Wilt Chamberlain. And his passing ability is also extremely underrated. Only 19 other centers in NBA history have averaged more than his career average of 4.3 assists per game in a season, and only one averaging his career high 5.8 assists per game, that being Wilt Chamberlain. And him and Wilt are the only centers in NBA history to average more than 4.3 assists in their career. And please don't give me the whole inflated stats argument, because the league leader in assists has always been around 8 to 10 every year in NBA history, dating all the way back to 1956. So considering everything I just said, can we stop with the narrative that any big man in today's era can dominate like Russell did? Even in just a statistical standpoint, they wouldn't. Don't even regard the winning part, because clearly only a select few can, and that's still doubtable, because this man was essentially a 6'9" Draymond Green on the offensive end, and his defense is in a league of its own. And at the same time, can we stop with this narrative that he can't play today as well? Because yes, I know Bill Russell would not dominate the game like he did in the 60s, but for a guy to play 60 years after the fact with all these changes to the game and how it's played, and for him to play like, let's say, a Ben Wallace or a DeAndre Jordan is still extremely impressive and shows how timeless of a player Bill Russell is. And I still don't get why people think that if a rookie Bill Russell was drafted in today's league, that he would literally just play like how he did in the 1960s and wouldn't adjust to today's game. Because Bill Russell's defensive capabilities are timeless, and I think his quickness would also help him switch off screens and pick and rolls and defend guards. On the offensive end, again, people just make this assumption that if Bill Russell played in today's game, that he wouldn't change his game. But regardless, his coast-to-coast ability is really something I've only seen from maybe Draymond Green, Lamar Odom from time to time, and he can easily keep up and run with the transitions of today's NBA. And in half-court sets, his passing ability is really good, and I think he could be an Al Horford on the passing end. However, on the scoring side of things, he's not gonna be like Shaq down low or Ryan Anderson from 3. But if you can pair him up with an elite point guard like Chris Paul or James Harden or John Wall, they can do some magic. So I think he'd be like a hybrid between Draymond Green and DeAndre Jordan, and I think he could average around 12 to 14 points, 12 to 14 rebounds, 4 to 5 assists, 1.5 steals, and 2 to 3 blocks a game. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like a pretty dominant ass player. And then let's go on to the he faces no competition in the 60s and benefited from a weak era argument. Because although it does have some merit to it, like how there aren't as many teams as there are right now, and let's be real, the talent throughout the league is not where it is right now, but the idea is blown way out of proportion to the point where people have this idea implanted into their minds that the 60s was basically just Wilt, Bill Russell, and everybody else. And I know all of these guys I'm gonna mention also did benefit from the time period statistically, but from a competitive standpoint, doesn't there come to a point where we realize that all these guys that benefited from a weak era faced each other? Jerry Lucas, Wilt Chamberlain, Elgin Baylor, Jerry West, Gail Goodrich, Hal Greer, Paul Arizin, Walt Bellamy, Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, Bob Pettit, Bailey Howell, Rick Barry, Nate Thurman, Oscar Robertson, Billy Cunningham, Chet Walker, Zelmo Beatty, Lenny Wilkins. I mean, I can keep on going on. Come on, bro. Like, I know they had inflated stats, but that doesn't change the fact that they still played each other. And the fact that Bill was out there guarding big men like Willis Reed, Wilt, Pettit, Thurman, while at the same time trying to block the guards and wings like the Elgin Baylors and the Big O's, because, you know, there was no three-point line and they basically relied on midi and in. I just think the whole Russell had no competition argument is so exaggerated. And there's the whole he had a team full of Hall of Famers argument, which I can't deny is true. But again, it's exaggerated to the point where you would think Russell just got carried and faced garbage teams night in and night out. Like for example, in the 1966 finals, yes, Russell did have Hondo, Sam Jones, and Sanders, but let's not act like the Lakers didn't have Jerry West, Gail Goodrich, Elgin Baylor, Rudy LaRusso, who is not a Hall of Famer, but became a 20 and 10 guy after he left LA, and Hazard, who became a 24 point per game scorer 2 years later. And you can even continue on and really dive into the rosters the Celtics face, and you see that the talent gap between the Celtics and everyone else wasn't as big as people make it out to be. And the fact that Bill Russell went to 11 game 7s, 5 of them in the NBA finals, and won all of them is insane, because you could clearly see that the teams he faced had the talent to beat the Celtics but never did. Come on, man. We always say anything can happen in game 7, right? Russell was in 11, 5 in the finals, and won all of them? Are you tripping? And as far as the competition gap, I would recommend looking at the 1968 finals, 1969 finals, 1965 second round, and the 1964 finals to see what I'm talking about. So as we can clearly see, Bill Russell is a generational talent that can play in any era and succeed. Obviously not to the degree that he did in the 60s, but succeed nonetheless, if not be dominant. But again, Bill Russell's greatness goes beyond the stat sheet and the rings, because he clearly has the talent and the accolades to be a top 10 player of all time. And I just disproved all the arguments that people use to diminish his accomplishments to the degree that they do. But this man, Bill Russell, really did change the way basketball would be played forever and laid the foundation for the NBA today. I mean, take a look at this story. Before Bill Russell, it was frowned upon to even jump, to block shots. And he was considered unorthodox for something simple as jumping to block shots. And obviously, he would pioneer that department. So the next time you see a LeBron chase down block or a DeAndre Jordan swat to the 5th row, thank Bill Russell for being a pioneer. He was the key part in the team that introduced the fast break into the NBA along with Cousy, as he could, like I said before, run the fast break like a damn forward and had really good passing skills, and often he would block shots to a teammate like an outlet pass. So the next time you see a simple fast break, you could partially thank Bill Russell for that too. He was also the first African American coach in the NBA, which we all know would become a huge precedent and would pave the way for African Americans in the NBA, not only through playing but for managing positions. So the next time you see Doc Rivers, Tyronn Lue, Mike Brown, Alvin Gentry, you could thank Bill Russell for that too. And just to add to his huge list of accomplishments, when he was a coach, which was already a precedent in itself, he was also a player coach and won 2 rings back to back at the tail end of his career. And I don't give a damn what the competition was like. If you are literally coaching the players and leading the team on the court at the same damn time, and you win not 1 but 2 championships back to back at the tail end of your career, that alone should put him in the top 10. So when people say he has no competition, it baffles me because he did. When people say he couldn't play in today's league, it baffles me because he can, and he would dominate. When people say he's overrated and point to his stats, it baffles me because they basically only look at the points, and his greatness goes beyond that. When people say anyone can do what Bill Russell did in the 60s, it baffles me because they couldn't. And that is why Bill Russell is the most disrespected legend in NBA history. And notice how I haven't said 11 rings since the first sentence of this video. But with that being said, man, put some damn respect on Bill Russell's name, and I am out, man. Shit pissing me off, man. Peace.